I'll never forget the day my daughter came home from school, tears in her eyes, and said, "Mom, I don't think I'm brave enough." She had just watched a classmate stand up against something unfair, and while she admired the courage, she whispered, "What if I'm not that strong?" And you know what? I get it, because if we're honest, how many of us have felt the same way? We live in a world that loves to celebrate women's strength, but rarely talks about how exhausting it can be to always hold it together. But here's the truth. Bravery isn't about being fearless. It's about showing up, even when you're scared. And research shows us something surprising. The bravest women aren't the ones who never fall. They're the ones who rise again and again with the world watching. So today, on International Women's Day, I'm not here to talk about having it all figured out. I'm here to celebrate the quiet, messy, extraordinary courage it takes to be a woman in this world. To speak up when it's easier to stay quiet, to hold space for others when your own heart is heavy, and to keep showing up when no one's clapping. Because here's what I believe to my core. You are already braver than you realize. And maybe today is the day you stop waiting to feel ready and start owning the power that's been in you all along. First, you are not too much. Not too loud, not too ambitious, not too emotional. And the minute you stop apologizing for who you are, you make room for the women coming behind you. I can't tell you how many times I've heard women say, "I feel like I'm too much, too opinionated, too emotional, too driven." And here's the thing, when we hear that message enough, we start to believe that our strength is a problem to be solved rather than a gift to be celebrated. But let me tell you something, being too much is often just another way of saying you're making people uncomfortable by being fully yourself. And that discomfort, that's not your burden to carry. Research shows that women who express strong opinions or take on leadership roles are more likely to be labeled as difficult or bossy, while men doing the same thing are called confident or assertive. The double standard is real. And if we're not careful, we start shrinking ourselves to fit inside it. Here's what I've learned. When you play small to make other people comfortable, you betray yourself. And the cost of that betrayal is high. It shows up as exhaustion from pretending to be someone you're not. It looks like questioning your own voice because you're worried about being too much for someone else. And I know this because I've lived it. There have been moments in my life where I've dimmed my own light, softened my words, and tried to squeeze myself into a version that felt easier for other people to accept. But here's the problem. You can't be both fully alive and constantly managing other people's perceptions of you. So let me ask you, what would it look like to stop apologizing for the parts of you that are bold, opinionated, or passionate? What would it feel like to trust that your voice matters? Not just when it's convenient, but all the time. Because when one woman chooses to show up fully, without shrinking, without apologizing, she doesn't just free herself, she makes it safer for every other woman watching her to do the same. And maybe today is the day you stop believing the lie that you're too much and start believing the truth that the world actually needs more of you. Second, you don't have to do it all to be worthy. Research is clear. Perfectionism is a 20-ton shield that keeps us from being seen. Let it go. If there's one thing I know for sure, it's this. Women are really good at wearing themselves out in the name of being good enough. We juggle 100 invisible responsibilities every day, work, family, relationships, and somewhere along the way we pick up this belief that if we just do everything perfectly, we'll finally feel like we're enough. But here's the truth. Perfection isn't about striving for excellence. It's about trying to earn love and belonging by performing, pleasing, and proving. And it's exhausting. I've talked to so many women who feel like no matter how much they do, it's never enough. They're running on empty but still pushing themselves to check every box because somewhere deep down, there's a voice whispering, if I stop, will everything fall apart? And if I'm not doing it all, am I still worthy? I get it. I've been there. And what I've learned, sometimes the hard way, is that perfectionism is not the path to being loved or accepted. It's just the fear of being judged, wrapped up in a really pretty package. And here's what the research tells us. Women who tie their self-worth to being perfect are more likely to struggle with anxiety, burnout, and even physical exhaustion. Because perfection is a moving target. No matter how much you achieve, it always tells you not quite, do more. But the truth is your worth isn't something you earn by doing more. It's something you already have by being who you are. And when you start to believe that, everything changes. You begin to set boundaries without guilt. You stop measuring your value by your to-do list. And maybe for the first time, you breathe a little easier knowing that you were never meant to carry it all alone. So if no one has told you this lately, you are already enough. Not because of how much you do or how perfectly you do it, but simply because you are here, living, showing up as yourself. And maybe the bravest thing you can do today is to finally let go of the belief that you have to do it all to be worthy. Third, boundaries aren't a betrayal. They're a form of love. Clear boundaries protect your time, your energy, and your sense of self. And that's not selfish. That's essential. Somewhere along the way, a lot of us were taught that being a good woman means being available all the time to our families, our friends, our work, saying yes to everything and everyone. And if you dare to say no, if you set a boundary, there's often this little pang of guilt, like you're letting someone down. But here's the truth. When you constantly prioritize everyone else's needs at the expense of your own, it's not kindness. It's self-abandonment. And the cost of that is high. I've seen this pattern in so many women, myself included. We push aside our exhaustion because we don't want to disappoint anyone. We ignore that quiet voice inside that says, I need a break, because we're afraid people will think we're selfish. And when we do this long enough, we start to lose touch with who we are beneath all the roles we play. And here's what the research tells us. Women with clear boundaries report higher levels of well-being and lower levels of resentment. Because when you set a boundary, you're not pushing people away. You're creating a space where real connection can happen without burnout or bitterness. But let's be honest, setting boundaries is uncomfortable. Especially when you've spent years being the person who says, I'll handle it, even when you're drowning. And sometimes the hardest boundaries aren't with strangers, they're with the people you love the most. I've had to learn this the hard way. There were seasons in my life where my calendar was packed, my energy was drained, and I told myself, it's fine, I can handle it. Until one day, I realized that handling everything meant I was disappearing in the process. And the truth hit me, I am not limitless, and neither are you. Here's what I've learned. Boundaries are how we teach people what it means to love us. When you say, I can't take that on, or I need time for myself, you're not rejecting people, you're inviting them to know you more deeply. You're saying, this is what it means to be in a healthy relationship with me. So if no one has given you permission yet, let me do it now. You are allowed to rest. You are allowed to say no without an explanation. You are allowed to protect your peace, because the people who love you, the people who truly see you, will respect your boundaries. And the people who don't, well, maybe they were benefiting from your lack of them. And maybe today is the day you stop feeling guilty for protecting your time and start believing that boundaries aren't a betrayal. They're an act of self-respect. Fourth, your voice matters. Not just the polished version you think people want to hear, but the honest, raw truth that only you can speak. And when one woman stands up, it makes it safer for the next one. I've spent years listening to stories from women across different backgrounds, ages, and experiences. And there's one thing I hear over and over again. I want to speak up, but I'm afraid. Afraid of being judged. Afraid of not getting it perfectly right. Afraid that their voice won't matter. And I get it. There's a lot at stake when you use your voice, especially when the world has taught you that being agreeable is safer than being honest. But here's the truth. Silence doesn't protect us. It only isolates us. And the research is clear. When women speak openly, especially about hard truths, it not only empowers them, it creates a ripple effect of courage in the people around them. I once heard a woman share how, for years, she stayed quiet in meetings, even when she had ideas, even when she knew she had something valuable to contribute. She told herself, I'll speak when I'm more confident, when I'm absolutely sure. But one day, she realized the cost of her silence wasn't just professional, it was personal. Every time she swallowed her words, she was also swallowing a little bit of herself. And if you've ever been there, holding back your truth because it feels safer, you know how heavy that silence can be, because when we don't speak up, we carry that weight with us. And the longer we stay quiet, the harder it becomes to remember that our voice even matters. But here's the other side of that truth. When one woman speaks up, it gives every woman watching her permission to do the same. And that kind of courage, it's contagious. I've seen it happen. One honest conversation, one woman daring to say, this isn't working for me, or I deserve better, can change everything. It creates space for others to be brave too. And sometimes your voice isn't just about you, it's about the people who need to hear it. So let me ask you, what truth are you holding back? What would you say if you weren't worried about being liked or getting it perfect? Because here's the bottom line. Your voice has the power to shape the world around you, not by being the loudest, not by having all the answers, but by being honest, by being real, by daring to speak even when your voice shakes. And maybe today is the day you stop waiting for permission and start believing that your voice is already enough. And finally, joy is an act of resistance. In a world that tells women to be everything to everyone, choosing joy for yourself is revolutionary. It's funny, when you ask people what they want most in life, a lot of them will say, I just want to be happy. But when you ask women what brings them joy, there's often a long pause. And not because they don't know, but because for so many of us, joy feels like a luxury, something we'll get to once everyone else's needs are met. I've heard women say, I'll slow down when things are less busy, or I'll make time for myself once everything else is handled. But here's the truth. If you're waiting for permission to feel joy, you'll be waiting forever. And research backs this up. Joy isn't a reward we earn by working harder or doing more. It's a practice. And the people who experience the deepest sense of joy aren't the ones with the easiest lives. They're the ones who make room for joy in the middle of their messiest, most complicated moments. But choosing joy, it can feel vulnerable, especially when you live in a culture that celebrates hustle and productivity over rest and play. There's this underlying message that joy has to be justified, as if you need to prove you've earned a moment of happiness. And for women, that message is even louder. I know this struggle personally. There were seasons in my life when I was so busy taking care of everyone else that joy felt like a distant memory. I'd convinced myself that everything needed to be perfect before I could slow down and enjoy the life I was building. But here's what I learned the hard way. If you wait for perfect circumstances, you'll miss the joy that's already here. And here's something else the research tells us. Joy isn't selfish. It's actually contagious. When women choose joy, not the polished, Instagrammable kind, but real, messy, deep down joy, it creates a ripple effect. It gives other women permission to do the same. And that kind of joy, it's a form of resistance against a world that wants us to stay small, overworked, and exhausted. So let me ask you, when was the last time you did something purely because it made you happy? Not because it was productive, not because it served someone else, but just because it fills you up. Because the truth is, joy isn't something you find, it's something you claim. And maybe today is the day you stop waiting for life to be perfect and start choosing joy right where you are. Here's what I want you to remember. You are already enough. You don't need to shrink yourself to fit anyone's expectations. You don't have to carry everything alone to be worthy. You are allowed to set boundaries, use your voice, and choose joy without apology. And when you do, you don't just change your own life, you change the world for the women who come after you. Every time you stand up for yourself, you make it easier for another woman to do the same. Every time you choose authenticity over perfection, you create space for others to be real. And every time you refuse to dim your light, you remind the rest of us that our light matters too. So as we celebrate Women's Day, my hope is that you give yourself permission to show up fully, as bold, messy, and brilliant as you are, not because it's easy, but because the world needs women who are willing to be seen, to speak truth, and to lead with courage. And if you ever wonder whether your voice, your boundaries, or your joy matter, let me be the one to tell you. They do. You do. Good luck, and don't forget, the world is better, braver, and brighter because you're in it.